السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وصلى الله على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. For those of you who are watching, I am your brother Dawud, the Executive Director of the Michigan Chapter of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. And with me this evening is our law clerk, Sister Sahar Faraj. She formerly interned with us at CAIR Michigan as a legal intern, and now she's clerking with us. And she's a Palestinian American and is involved in a number of things in relationship to grassroots organizing as well as civil rights. And this evening, we're going to have a discussion between us two in terms of police accountability from Detroit to Kenosha. So, assalamu alaikum.
Salam. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. If you can tell our viewers a little something about yourself before we continue with the conversation.
Yeah, so I am a Dearborn native, Detroit based. So I went into law school. I remember for the sole reason and purpose of being able to, benefit the communities of, that are underrepresented and don't understand the law, and just being able to be a part of those communities and help uplift those. So civil rights and human rights, self-care was like a perfect fit for me. I am also a grassroots organizer. I am a member of the Palestinian Youth Movement, which is a grassroots transnational organization that is in solidarity and liberation and joint struggle with all oppressed people, as well as I organize with Detroit Will Breathe, which is the organization that has been congruent with the Black Lives Matter protests in Detroit. We've been protesting every single day. There's actually a protest happening right now in Detroit.
And sorry for taking you away from that right now.
No, it's okay. This is we all can contribute to the movement in different ways. Everyone has their capacity, so nothing is lost. So that's great. And yeah, so I've been in the streets since the uprising started in May, literally right after Eid. I remember at least being thankful that it wasn't Ramadan anymore and we were protesting. Yeah, that's pretty much what I've been doing for this past entire summer. And graduating law school at the same time. So those were my two big events.
Congratulations for that. And we pray to Allah that He strengthens you in your work and that you can be a service not just for Palestinians or Muslims, but for all people who are suffering injustice and oppression, that you're able to use your legal skills that you're honing out in the streets, as well as CAIR Michigan, that you can be a benefit for people from here all the way to Palestine and beyond.
Inshallah, Ameen.
So let's get into and you talked about how you're normally on the grassroots, and you've been involved in a lot of protests as of late.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, I've been involved in protests as well, and going back many years from from even back from Ayanna Stanley Jones and before, when the Detroit police killed her on the east side of Detroit, to other actions we've had against Detroit police, the Dearborn police, NYPD, Ferguson. There's been a lot. But recently, in 2 weeks, you are an actual eye and ear witness to something that was just straight up crazy as far as police abuse with the Detroit police. And you actually were a victim of that abuse itself. So if you can just tell some of the viewers and get them up to speed, if they haven't seen it on the news, what happened 2 weeks ago while police accountability protesters were peacefully protesting against the Detroit Police Department.
Mm-hmm. So Detroit Will Breathe, we organized a statewide date of action, which was for August 22nd. And the idea was that other people in cities or people can organize within their own cities or come out to the city of Detroit and come out and stand in joint struggle against the police oppression, and to demand that the feds, it was against Operation Legend, and to get the feds out of Detroit, essentially. So with that, we at the end of the march, around 10:30, we were on Woodward and Adams in downtown Detroit, and we decided that we were going to hold that space. We were going to hold that space, and we were going to, hold that. So our demands were very clear that we were not welcome. The feds were not welcomed by the people of Detroit. The community has spoken. We want the feds out. So it wasn't, I want to give the police at least an hour that they were able to mobilize in full riot gear and multiple tanks, and they cut off the streets. They cut off both sides of the streets. They redirected traffic. And although it felt slow, it happened like almost instantaneously. We were completely surrounded, and riot police started approaching us and started coming at us. But just right before, and if you go on Detroit Will Breathe, any of their social media accounts, you can see what we were doing. We were, speaking amongst ourselves, talking about what if, what like an abolition would look like. We were giving political education. We were talking and engaging with members of the community as they were walking up and down Woodwards and Adams. We were letting them know what we were there for. Some people were chanting, some people were singing, some people were, I was amongst some of the people that were sitting down reading, and we were just there to, to hold the space, to spread awareness, and to be, for people that were walking by, be like, hey, what are you guys doing? This is what we're standing for. And you'd be surprised how many people don't know that we've been in the streets for almost 100 days, as well as the fact that the feds here. A lot of the community members and people that are downtown don't understand the actual like structure in which Detroit is oppressed, and all the things that come into it. So what happened was we saw the riot police approaching, and we all stood our ground, and they didn't really make an attempt to disperse the crowd. They didn't make an attempt to speak with any of us. What they did was they rushed us. And they brutalized us. I saw people that I have been seeing every single day wither in pain. I saw police acting with complete impunity, just going in for the attack as like people. The media wants to talk about it as a mass arrest, but that's what it was. That's not. The police were not there with the intention to arrest. They were there with the intention to brutalize. They were there
throwing down people's face mask and spraying pepper spray in their faces.
Yeah, that's what they did to me as well. So they weren't there to disperse the crowd. We were peacefully protesting. We had no, like system of self-defense. There was just like, it was us and them, and just street in between us. There were no blockades, there were no nothing. So they were there it was very clear with that they were there with the intent to brutalize us and to harm us, and with no intent of arresting us, with no intent of trying to usher us out. People think that the police are there to protect and serve, but I'd really like to question those people. Have they ever met riot police? It's really unfortunate, because one of the sergeants for the riot police is a Arab man. So, we had our little back and forth with that, and he was the same sergeant that held the riot line when we were on 6 Mile in San Juan for Hakeem Littleton as well. And you'd just be surprised with the brutality that, these riot police and just regular police were just running after people. There's so many different accounts. There was one of the pictures that went wild, like you said, was that went viral, was how there was a woman that was already on the floor, and she had like 3 officers on top of her, and then like another officer came and sprayed her directly into the face, like direct contact with her face, and she was not moving. She wasn't resisting arrest. She was just already on the floor, and they were trying to get zip ties on her, and a police officer just came out of nowhere and like sprayed her directly into the face. There was a medic. There are medics. Geneva Convention says that you're not allowed to. We talk about law. And in the context of law, it's really great to be able to point out, like, okay, this law says this. But what people need to understand, that laws are not divinely sent or divinely written. The same laws that people keep mentioning are written by people that are in power. So they're going to be enforced selectively in a way in which suits their interests. So, and I just want people to keep remembering that, because the way that people say, well, you broke the law, and let's start to deconstruct what kind of behaviors have been criminalized to begin with. Do you know what I mean? So there's that, and then like medics were just targeted right from the jump. I saw medics being pulled out of their cars, thrown on the ground. The medic team that follows us in the streets, and their cars are currently impounded by DPD, and they haven't been able to, get them released. One of the medics was denied medical attention. He had a collapsed lung. The police beat him so bad that they broke his rib. He had a collapsed lung, and he was sitting on the bus with us. We were on a DDOT bus after they had arrested all of us, and they put us on a car, and the DDOT was supposed to transport us to the jail. We had to demand and make a lot of noise that they called the EMS because they were reluctant to do that. And several other protesters, the police had zip tied their hands so tight that their fingers were blue, and they refused multiple times at multiple instances to loosen the zip ties. And to be like, just to give you a little bit of how tight these zip ties were, they couldn't even fit the tool underneath it that is used to cut off zip ties. So people were withering in pain during the attack, as well as the aftermath, as we were, waiting to see what was going to happen.
The same thing happened to me by the Capitol Police when I was arrested protesting outside of former Congressman Tim Ryan's office. The Capitol Police did the same thing to me. They grabbed me first, but they had them on so tight that literally I lost circulation and feeling by the similar sort of situation. So I'm just saying I've gone through that sort of abuse from police before myself.
It's a debilitating pain, and it's both physical and mental, because you're also like, you don't want to succumb to the physical pain, but mentally these police don't leave you alone. I think people are under the impression that after you get arrested they just like leave you, but they don't. They terrorize you. They make comments walking up and down. I mean, they left me on the bus, the last one to get processed, because I was being loud with them. So they do these things that try to break you down, but you just have to be resilient in your strength and in your cause of why you're there. And we were fighting for liberation, and we are continuing to fight for liberation. And as a Palestinian, I know exactly what that means. And it just brings up a good, like, Hassan Kanafani, which is like, he was a revolutionary for the Palestinian cause, and he was assassinated by Zionists. And he often said that in response to a reporter, this British reporter who was asking him, well, why not go into peace talks with Israel? Why not just like stop all the bloodshed? Isn't that better? And then he's like, and then Hassan responded back by saying, like, better for who? For you? For us, life in the liberation of our land is as essential as life itself. So even in the face of death, oppressed people will still stand strong and resilient, because anything else is a compromise, is not enough, because it's not essential. What we need is liberation, and that's what's essential. So remembering your resolve and being able to orient yourself and ground yourself will keep you from letting officers, whomever they be, being able to destroy your resiliency, or no matter how many times you get arrested, or stand in the front lines of that kind of situation.
So there's something that you said that I really want to highlight, and there's something else I want to add for political education for some of the viewers. So one thing that you mentioned was not just the issue of protesters being bum rushed by the Detroit police or legal observers, but medics. In the past, even journalists have been assaulted and have been falsely detained. So point number one, when people talk about Chief Craig or how great the Detroit police are, and this is beyond other things such as the green light technology that is like being used for mass surveillance and being passed on also to federal law enforcement entities. Besides other issues of them tasing and unjustly killing civilians. I mean, one thing I want to highlight with these protests is that, and people talk about, well, Detroit police or give Chief Craig the benefit of the doubt, we would be like shaking our fingers or saying, oh, look at those uncivilized people if we were to see someone like, let's say, the Egyptian police doing this in Tahrir Square, right? Or in some other place where people are protesting, let's say Tiananmen Square in China. Then we would say, oh, well, look at those police right there. But in all actuality, the Detroit police has really not been doing anything much differently than those autocratic, those police forces for those autocratic regimes overseas. Number one. Number two, and I always like to lift up Detroit Red. That was his nickname, but Malcolm X. Allah bless his soul. And Detroit Red, he famously said, of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So one thing that Malcolm always talked about, and even in the old Nation of Islam, and this is something for people to consider watching this who are involved in protest, and we've done this in the past, we've organized protests. When you're in an area you're protesting, you need to understand, number one, the lay of the land. You need to be able to understand how to be able to extricate yourself from a situation if you have law enforcement trying to enclose you. How can you extract yourself from that situation? Number one, this is something very important. So there needs to be some sort of, if you're unfamiliar with the neighborhood that you're going to protest in, you should go there and do like a little reconnaissance and know how to get yourself out to be prepared, number one. Number two, we should be going to these protests, especially when it relates to law enforcement. The assumption should not be that they're going to protect our rights. No, the assumption actually should be that they're going to violate our rights, which means that we should be prepared and take the proper precautionary steps, right? That's the second thing. The third thing is, given what's been going on in Kenosha, to Portland, Oregon, to in other states where we've had people ram cars into protesters or even open carry guns against protesters, that I've been involved in protests where we literally had our own security at the perimeter. So we had security that was doing basically surveillance to see, or reconnaissance to see, who could be coming to the protests, either one, to do harm to the protesters, or two, there's such a thing as people hijacking protests. And we know about this during the counterintelligence program, but that never stopped, where agent provocateurs will come and try to cause some mayhem or try to divert the messaging or what's the actual goals of the protests and try to take it somewhere else. And this has happened in Minnesota after George Floyd was killed. This happened in Chicago that I know of for sure. I know two people who were there who saw certain things. It took place in other places. So the issue of protesting, and we are going out in these streets, we have adversaries from several different areas, both from governmental entities that we can see and maybe those we can't see, but there are also people who are white nationalists, white supremacists, and others who could try to cause to do us harm or act like they're part of the protest to do something. And then people are saying, well, look at those protesters, right? So I'm just mentioning that because going back to what Malcolm said, of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research, and we understand the history of how movements have tried to be derailed and how people tried to take the emphasis off certain things and then to almost try to give cover for law enforcement being overly excessive in their force and dealing with protesters. But go ahead and comment on what I just said.
Yeah, so I really would love to touch on how you were talking about community. I mean, like, there are definitely like agencies that are actively working against protesters. I mean, before the uprisings and even before that, I mean, surveillance is a huge deal within the Palestinian community when you're like as a First Amendment right, when you're on college campuses. I remember having to deal with whether or not when I'm applying for law school and I was writing my personal statement and when I'm applying for jobs now, whether or not I mention I'm Palestinian. Just because those things get brought up, and when you mess with the wrong Zionist, that you never know what's going to happen, and then you get blacklisted, and then you get put on the Canary mission, and then you can't, and then it becomes this entire ordeal where you're labeled as an anti-Semite, and then you also get blacklisted, and then you also can't potentially go back home and visit your homeland because of all these red flags that the Israeli government is allowed. So we talk a lot about how the U.S. surveils and extends its technology to different countries and different imperialist structures within the world. But I think what gets lost in translation is a lot of how the U.S. also offers Israel like a huge window into the U.S., into Palestinian activism, as well as any like inter-solidarity work. I mean, the ADL was just the Anti-Defamation League. Like, a lot of people think that they're like a grassroots, like, great organization, when in all actuality, they collect information about Palestinian groups as well as Black groups who have been forming joint struggles and connections and letting DC know. So this surveillance.
By the way, for people watching, the ADL, by the way, years ago had to pay restitutions, but they were busted on spying on Arab American activists, right? So you can Google ADL spying on Arabs and see the news stories that came up in actual legal cases. So we're not talking about any wild conspiracy theories. We're actually talking about something that's been proven in an American court of law. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Bismillah. Go ahead.
So it's also identifying that these agencies are already working against us is like something that we've already grown up with. I mean, as a Palestinian, I already know that there's some things that you say about Palestine, some things you don't. Some places where you say you're Palestinian, some places you don't. But it's also, I think it's way more important to recognize that there's community-based organizations that are also there to cause infiltration and divide. And we witnessed a lot of that in our first days of our movement, in the first weeks of our movement in Detroit, when we were trying to protest, when we successfully protested the unlawful, unconstitutional curfew that was set in place by Chief Craig. There were a lot of community organizations that came and tried to and successfully scared some people away, otherwise not really so much, and tried to get people to go home and to obey the curfew. They were out there more than one time. And they're kind of like on the outskirts of a protest, like watching us, kind of thing, where, so I think it's really important.
I want to interject. No, because some of the people that were caping for the Detroit police were actually African-American activists who actually give cover to Chief Craig and to Mayor Duggan. So we have to keep it real. I'm not going to go into any name dropping. Actually, I know some of them, right? But there are people, so-called corporate activists or even clergy, they're in cahoots. They're literally working with the government that is involved in surveillance of the community and actually are trying to quell dissent in peaceful protests. Right. So we have to be clear. We have to be clear about that. And again, that's nothing new, because the same thing happened during the civil rights movement in Detroit Red or Malcolm X. He talked about that too.
Yeah, so that's just really something a lot of people have to understand, is that we are working against multiple structures, or we're becoming familiar with a lot of roadblocks, and not all of them are agency based. A lot of them may be community based. So it's important to identify those types of things in a movement and recognize where we stand. I think that Malcolm is one of my mentors. Like, he still serves to be one of my mentors, and I listened to the speech on the ballot or the bullet a lot. I was just listening to it yesterday, and he says a lot of profound things in that speech, but one of the things that sticks out to me the most is when he says that there's never been a bloodless revolution. People don't people don't sing up on freedom. You can swing up on freedom, but there's never been a bloodless revolution. And there's no such thing as loving your enemy. There's no such thing as kind of getting freedom, because there's no such thing as second-class citizenship. He calls that modern-day slavery. There's no such thing as second-class citizenship. So you're either free or you're a slave. So it's being a part of a movement. I mean, being a part of an uprising at this caliber has been for almost 100 days now, 100 days on Saturday. It's been extremely rewarding, and a lot of like tough battles where we've had to like recognize that there are all these impediments that manifest itself in different ways. I mean, the law, we already know we're up against the law. We already know we're up against the police department. And we aren't naive enough to think that we're never going to have to face state sanctioned violence, or that we can overcome, like on a one-on-one battle, state sanctioned violence. But the position that we take is resistance. So it's resistance against the police departments, it's resistance against the structures of oppression, it's resistance against community organizations that are there to infiltrate and divide the people on behalf of these structures of oppression. So being a part of a mass uprising.
Some of them get grant money, by the way, right? They get grant money from the government and foundations, so they're not given specific orders, but there's a saying about you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So there are actually community organizations and leaders who actually they're incentivized to quell dissent and protests, and to work on behalf of those who are violating our civil liberties. I just had to throw that in because there's always money involved in these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And a lot of these things, people like, I remember reading something yesterday about how NGOs are co-opted sometimes, and how the system co-ops like what actually could be like potential like movements, and they like infiltrate them and become like career activists, as opposed to like also, you know, gaining that momentum and being a part of a mass struggle. So co-option is like it's a huge derailment, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of active and intentional work in the streets, because there are a lot of forces at play that are trying to stop the movement. There are a lot of, I mean, do you think DPD and Chief Craig and Mayor Duggan are really happy that we've been in the streets for 100 days? No, we've been exposing, a lot of people are becoming privy to Detroit's history and to the gentrification that's happening. I'd like to talk about the event that I did. I did an event where I brought the movement actually to Dearborn, where we protested. We joined the national call to action. It's called the Days of Resistance, and it was by the Samadoun network, the Palestinian Political Prisoners Network, that called out a second national day of action against the continued annexation of Palestinian land. And we joined the Days of Resistance, and in Dearborn, where I was able to parallel, and I don't even like to use the word parallel, because it's one and the same, where I was able to demonstrate to people who were unfamiliar with the Palestinian cause how gentrification and annexation are one and the same, how oppression of Black people in brown communities in Detroit are the same but looks different, but it's the same in Palestine, and how a lot of the weapons of surveillance and oppression are generated in Gaza and maintained and like tested out in Gaza, and then they're shipped over here to Black and brown communities to also be implemented, to see how the use is, and sold to different kinds of communities. So in that, I was able to show how gentrification is a way in which it's like, where the process is gradual, just like how annexation of Palestinian land has been, Palestinian land and resources and its people, where slowly Detroit schools started being defunded, community centers were disappearing, libraries were being funded, like the neighborhood upkeep started disappearing, and these communities became like unlivable and untenable. And then then you have people like the Illiches that buy up properties and they never fix them. You have like all of these things, and then you have in Palestine, the same thing happens. Israeli forces have control over the water. They shut off the electricity. They bomb all the schools. They bomb all the hospitals. There's segregated roads. Eventually, the conditions that are perpetuated by these systems become so unlivable, and nobody can survive them, that the only thing that can happen is displacement. And then once the people, the indigenous people in Palestine and the actual community in Detroit are displaced, all of a sudden there's money. All of a sudden there's resources. All of a sudden there's revitalization of life. All of a sudden we're making space for this phantom people that are not there. So a lot of my work within DWB and just being out there in the streets has been trying to like raise this level of consciousness and how like interconnected our struggles really are, and how oppression is just manifested. It's the imperialist power only know oppression because that's the only way that they can make profit and maintain their system. So it's just being able to perpetuate that oppression across across boundaries and these borders that seek to divide us. So it was a really successful event.
Okay, well, let me switch a little bit because we are probably about halfway through this now, and I want to shift from Detroit. And of course, you were talking about the connections between Detroit and Palestine, and alhamdulillah, some of these connections have been made for a while. I mean, just to keep it real, our community has to do better in Dearborn, just to be frank, because there's a lot of people in the community who still don't understand what in the world does what goes on in Detroit or in Flint or Kenosha. What does that have to deal with resisting illegal occupation and oppression in the Bilad? So we still have a lot of work to do. Political education, and even beyond that, really, I'd say it's empathy, which is really a spiritual trait. Like you can't knock empathy into someone's head with books, right? So
no, unfortunately not. I mean, that's kind of been a struggle that I've always had within, like, as a Palestinian living within the Dearborn community, which is predominantly Lebanese or not Palestinian. So I recall a lot of different conversations that I've had with different community members in Dearborn, and like, you won't find a Arab that doesn't understand the plight of the Palestinian people, who won't, or a person who won't say free Palestine that is from Swana. But then you have to parallel it. Then once you parallel it to like how Black Lives Matter and Palestine are the same thing, it's like it's hard for them to recognize that. And I don't know if it's their want or their desire to kind of just like fit in because people were displaced, like their families were displaced because of war. But that can't be the cop out. That can't be the explanation, because as Muslims in Islam, we have to stand against oppression in all of its forms and all of its manifestations. And if you believe as a Muslim, that's that's just like, a pillar that you should believe in. But also as an Arab, as a Middle Easterner, you should also, as you say free Palestine, they're synonymous. It means Black Lives Matter. So we have a lot of work, like you said.
Yeah. But in saying that, I'll tell you, when Ferguson went down, I'm telling you that the communities actually made quite a bit of progress since then. Because I remember back when Ferguson went down, and on social media talking with people basically in Dearborn were saying that Mike Brown deserved what he got. And I remember when we organized Muslims for Ferguson, and we were going out there, I remember vividly at that time, there were only two people that I know of from Dearborn, one Palestinian and one Lebanese sister, who now went on law school, and she's an attorney now. But there were only two people actually, who decided to go. But alhamdulillah, so things have improved some since then. At least there's some more empathy that was displayed when George Floyd and Breonna Taylor both were brutally murdered by the police. But I like to move on to Kenosha right now and talk about that. And it's actually interesting. I didn't know at the time until recently that actually Jacob Blake's father is Muslim. Actually, he did the Fatiha at a press conference, and then he asked support from the Muslim community to pray for his family, and he has some legal. He secured counsel, but we hope that if there's any support that the Blake family needs, that we'd be able to, not just spiritually, but financially, to be able to help them in what they're going through. So we're just putting that out there for those of you who are watching, that we really empathize with the Blake family right now. But what is so um, disturbing to me about what's going on right now is that, okay, he was shot, and he was shot in the back, and he posed no impending threat to the police officer at the time. Then the comment that the sheriff made afterwards, basically the warning that he was giving to Black folks who were protesting against what took place. And then we have on top of that 45, or when I say 45, I'm speaking of the guy in the Oval Office, who then just came out and defended the shooter, who came out on the streets and illegally crossed state border with an assault weapon, and shot 3 people, murdered 2 of them, and he defends the murderer and as self-defense, yet shows no empathy for Mr. Blake, much less asking for accountability for the police. So it's a hot mess. I just put it to you that way. But I'd like to get your take on, if there's anything else that I may have missed about that scenario. But the real danger of this moment right now, where the police do that, the victim gets handcuffed to his bed. No one from the police gets charged. Then a vigilante comes out and shoots 3 people, kills 2 of them, while the National Guard throws them some water. And then the president comes and actually defends the murderer.
I mean, I don't know what else we can say about 2020 other than like it's been no short of surprises in like this chaos that we're in. And I think that the only thing I want to point out is, or the most important thing to me, or what really like, because like all these, because I listened to the press conference as well from like all these different heads of agencies. I heard from Kenosha Police Department, the mayor from Kenosha, the FBI that was there, the National Guard that was there, and to find out that Michigan Governor Whitmore sent some troops out to Kenosha also to help.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that. You just hit me to something. So our so-called liberal governor, Big Gretch, sent people over to Wisconsin to help them control the people in Kenosha.
Yeah. So I'm just going to make sure, because I read that. Yeah, she's sending the National Guard. Whitmer sending Michigan National Guard to help at Wisconsin protests. So that's what was happening. And this was 5 days ago that she sent the National Guard out. Is when I watched the video of the shooter just walking right past tanks. And those tanks I've walked by, those tanks I've seen. They wouldn't have let me walk by them in Detroit, but I saw them. And the police that are just sitting in their car, just and like, I think people misidentify what privilege is. When we say white privilege and what privilege means, I think people think that means that you walk away with your life. And I'd really like to know what you think of what privilege is, because that means, it doesn't mean just life. What it means is that you're treated with human dignity, and that means that you also can walk away with your life. But that also means that you have respect, you have equality, you have equity, you have people that are listening, you have You have everything. So when people talk about white privilege or privilege in the system of imperialism and that is only maintained to oppress, I need them to watch that video because it is the visual representation of what it means to have privilege, and to have privilege means to be treated with basic human dignity, in that you are you're a representation of yourself and your intentions, and not treated with all of these. And that video really just hit me at my core, because I'm like, this is it. This is what everyone wants, but not everybody can get. In this person, a white male, is the epitome of what the imperialist structure and system is intended to maintain, and it did exactly what it was supposed to do. So all this continued surprise, and I mean, to have such an explicit representation of what the system is meant to perpetuate and maintain is something completely different than actually knowing that this is what it's supposed to do. But that video was really, it was really hard for me to watch, because I've faced off those things more than once in Detroit, and just let me tell you, that would not have happened. That would not have happened. Not one of us would have been able to walk right by.
Yeah, and I'll add on another comment besides what you said was good, but I want people to watch this to understand that whiteness in America is a construct. It's not simply about skin color. Whiteness is a construct, right? And it's not about melanin content or the lack thereof of melanin. And for the Arabs who are watching, especially Levantine Arabs who maybe have light skin and light hair or light eyes, under the construct of whiteness in America, you're not white, whether you're considered to have been on the census or not. Number one, you're not white socially, politically in America. So don't try to be white under the construct. Be yourself. And then number two, why question yourself, why would you want to be accepted in something within a structure of a privilege that marginalizes other people? So this is the attitude, well, as long as I get accepted and get mine, and then to forget about those people, right? So I think this is something that we have to do some real soul searching about. And this is kind of the problem that we have when we have people in our community who are involved in respectability politics. Yep. and strive for middle class acceptability, and how they engage police departments or the FBI at certain round tables, or immigration, trying to look safe. And if I can just give you a case study, Dr. Sami El-Arian, Palestinian American. No, not American. Palestinian. He was deported. He's teaching in Qatar now, I believe. Dr. Sami El-Arian, who was a professor at Southern Florida University, he was in the community in the year 2000. He was a chief fundraiser for President Bush before Bush became president. He went to the community, raised millions of dollars from Muslims and Arabs for Bush. Okay. Then, to the point that he met President Bush on the tarmac, and there's pictures of it, right? He encouraged major Muslim organizations to endorse Bush. Okay, Bush got in. Then 9/11 came. Then Dr. Sami El-Arian got arrested. He was accused of being involved in material support for terrorism, which wasn't true. They couldn't get him on that. Then he ended up getting deported after being put on home arrest and a house arrest, and got deported to Turkey, to Istanbul, right? So was Dr. El-Arian considered white on the census? Yes. Was his skin light and his hair straight? Yes. Did he have access to wealth? I mean, he had the phone number to the governor of Texas who became the president of the United States of America. And none of that made him white under the criminal justice system.
Mhm.
Right? None of that made him white. So
Mhm.
I just have to use that point of Dr. El Arian. If you don't know about him, look up Dr. Sami El Arian's case and read about that. And that's actually a case study of how aspirational whiteness for Arabs is a mirage.
Mhm.
Right? It's a waste of time. So don't even waste your time. And middle class respectability, that doesn't protect you. You know, what protects you is that you join the movement, or if you can't join the movement with your energy, you join, and we know we have these 3 T's: your time, your talent, or your treasure. Then you make dua and you give your money to support organizations that are involved in protecting civil rights and grassroots organizing. But we have a saying in Islamic spirituality by Yahya ibn Mu'adh. He said that if you cannot bring benefit, then at least do no harm. I'll say that again. If you cannot bring benefit, then at least do no harm. Meaning, don't try to cozy up with the police or the FBI, right, over the community and do their bidding, right, to marginalize community organizers and protests, and to try to paint this picture of, oh, why are people protesting the movement for Black lives or protesting about Black folks in Dearborn? Like, what does that have to do with us, right? So
I mean,
we have to get out of this mentality and this mindset.
yeah, just to touch on that as well, is that so the Dearborn police were really thrilled with me at all. So I remember the second I pulled into the parking lot, a Dearborn cop pulled up, and guess who they sent? A Palestinian cop. But I don't mess with identity politics because I'm more than that, because it's more than just your identity. And what people don't understand is like this imperialist structure and capitalism seeks to keep an individual at an individual base and not be able to connect in a collective where you're able to connect with these people in a community-based level. So I was already, all right, you're gonna send a Palestinian guy. I was just like, yo, then how, if you're Palestinian, then how are you becoming a part of a system that oppresses other people here? Like, so you know, if you know, then you should know. Second is that the Dearborn community um, redefined what the movement was. So the event, because I organized it, was a Black Palestinian liberation event. It was just to show solidarity. We were marching in Dearborn, and we marched to the Dearborn Police Department, because a lot of people think that the Dearborn police are good, but they're not. Just because they don't target Arabs or other people, they are perpetuating terror on Black and brown communities. Terror. Like, I know people personally who have the most horrible experiences with the Dearborn Police Department. But anyway, the Dearborn page, this Instagram page, painted the redefined what the movement, what the event was, and they called it an anti-Trump fascist rally for Black Lives Matter. And you know, there could be two readings into the reason why they redefined what the event was, and it could be because of anti-Palestinianness. I mean, it's no surprise that, you know, Dearborn exhibits a lot of anti-Palestinian sentiment. I have heard personal stories of personal, yes, and not just anti-Palestinian, anti-Yemeni sentiment, anti-Iraqi sentiment. Like, there is racism within our own community.
We were just talking about that in the office today.
Yeah. Yeah, I missed out on that. But yeah, inshallah. So there's the anti-Palestinian, but also painting the Black Lives Matter like not showing that the movement is against the cops in Dearborn, because Dearborn is such buddy with the cops, and everyone loves the police department, and everyone loves the chief, that they can do no wrong. And it's a form of respectability politics, like you said, because we have a lot of politicians within the city of Dearborn who went out of their way to make sure to post on Facebook that they were not involved in the protest, or that they were not involved in the events that took place in Dearborn. So, you know, Dearborn has all these layers that need to get pulled back and really exposed so that we can start to work within our own community. But I mean, with rate, it's it's pretty intertwined.
For sure, for sure. So as we conclude this discussion, and of course there'll be more discussions to come because the problem is not going away anytime soon. Um, so number one, of course, we have dua and we should pray. Number two, there's issues such as political education, right, which is very important.
Very important.
Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib said, Adun akal khairun min siddiqin ahmaq, that it's translated as a a a an intelligent adversary is better than a foolish ally, right? So sometimes we can be sincere and be sincerely wrong and cause actually more harm than good with through ignorance, right? So this is why political education is important. And by the way, we're launching a class at CAIR Michigan for the viewers. You can check it out on our website. It's called The History of Racism and Resistance in America. It starts on September 17th. It ends on December 10th. We'll have a number of speakers in-house and outside that will be speaking on a number of issues relating to Native American or indigenous people justice here in America, the experience of the Japanese American community and internment. It just won't be simply about Black folks. We'll obviously talk about anti-Arab racism and Islamophobia. So we're going to start off with the history of this, starting with the original colonialists and when that that perpetuator of genocide, Christopher Columbus, got lost coming to America. He got lost coming here, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
We have the history of racism and resistance in America class. So there's dua, there's political education, there's also donating to grassroots organizations and to civil rights organizations that have integrity. But besides these things of spirituality regarding prayer, besides political education, and besides people giving their treasure, what other suggestions that you can give to Muslims, be they Arab or not Arab, or Arab Americans who are watching this who are not Muslim, that want to get involved in the police accountability movement? What other advice do you have outside of the prayer, the political education, and giving some loot, giving some money, donations?
So those are pretty general categories that can include a lot of things. So just like political education has always been my biggest thing. Before the uprising, before everything, I've always been like a book nerd and history buff. Like I read all the time, because recognizing that you don't know everything and that there's still so much more that you can do. And like you said, Malcolm X said, history is our biggest teacher. So it's just recognizing those connections. Reach out to members in the community that you know who are active in the struggle. More than likely, we're willing to speak to you and we're willing to take you with us and show you what's up and why Black Lives Matter should be not a problem too. Just reaching out to your local activists. It's just showing up sometimes and maybe just listening. Nobody says that you have to be like, you're captive right when you're there. Come out, listen to a couple of rallies. A lot of the mobilizations that we have in downtown aren't just strictly marches. We do teach-ins. There was a webinar today. I did a lot of political intersectionality speeches before we would start marching sometimes. And then it's also just be willing to learn and come with an open disposition. Because if you're coming, and I feel like that's the biggest thing of all, because if you're coming in and you recognize that you don't understand why people are angry or the connections that are being made, then you have to be willing to develop a political analysis that's outside your comfort zone. Because once you are exposed to a lot of the different struggles in these different, I have been in Detroit for almost 100 days now. I was on the ground. I was in the east side. I was on the west side. And I see with my own eyes And it was akin to what I've witnessed in Palestine, watching tanks go up and down blocks and stationed up. I see police just terrorizing these neighborhoods, just sitting outside of these neighborhoods on these blocks, and people know exactly where they are. So it's just coming out. And Brian Stevenson is a civil rights attorney that works in Alabama, and he started the Equal Justice Project Initiative, Equal Justice Initiative, and he talks about how, to him, he feels like one of the solutions to Black people's ailments in the U.S. is just getting proximate, which is seeing for yourself. Like you said, empathy is a very hard trait to teach people. So if you recognize that within yourself, just come and see for yourself. If you're one of those people that need to just see it to believe it, then get proximate. Understand what these are. You have to get in touch with these communities that are first line in destruction because of these oppressive structures. I know that as Arab living in America, we don't live in the ghettos in villages of our hometown. We only visit those in the summers for like a month or two, right? So, but it's recognizing that it's perpetuated differently, but it's also here. So becoming proximate and being open and recognizing that it's okay to be wrong or that you've been wrong thus far, but being open to being a part of the struggle is what's going to define the struggle. So that's the advice I would give.
Alhamdulillah, and that's a very good piece of closing advice. And those who don't know or haven't experienced, don't understand, then try to reach outside your comfort zone and learn. And there's different ways of learning. There's obviously having knowledge conveyed, and then there's actually seeing with your own eyes and having a lived experience or getting a little taste of the reality, and that's what's most real. So with that, we will conclude. Thank you very much for coming on, and we ask you all who are watching to pray for Sister Sahar, who's again clerking right now with us at CAIR Michigan as a legal clerk, and we ask you to pray for her protection as she helps represent us out on these streets in Detroit and beyond. And she's been in Kalamazoo as well, not long ago when the Kalamazoo was involved in that brutality and those shenanigans. So please pray for her, and please also pray for your other brothers and sisters in CAIR who are trying to do something to preserve our civil liberties and help bring some dignity to this community. And also go on our website and look up information about our class and put it in your calendars for the history of racism and resistance in America. To the history of racism and resistance in America, and we all can learn a little something. And I myself, I plan on benefiting from some of the teachers who will be teaching these classes, and they'll be on Thursdays. So with that, we will conclude. Thank you all very much. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.